U.S. Supreme Court struck down President Donald Trump's so-called Liberation Day global tariffs, a blow to a central piece of the president's second administration.
Now to your money. As promised, this morning the Supreme Court ruled that President Trump's sweeping global tariffs are illegal and must end, blowing a huge hole in his signature plan to bring back business to the United States.
Power doesn't usually collapse in a single moment. It erodes slowly through legal challenges, market reactions, and institutional pushback. But every so often, a decision lands that changes the direction of an entire presidency overnight. That's what just happened. In a ruling that stunned Washington and sent shockwaves through global markets, the Supreme Court has struck down former President Donald Trump's
The Senate has repeatedly voted on a bipartisan basis to reject this illegal trade war.
sweeping global tariff framework, marking one of the most significant judicial defeats of his economic agenda. For years, tariffs were not just a policy tool for Trump, they were the centerpiece of his global strategy. Steel, aluminum, autos, electronics, solar panels, entire sectors were reshaped through aggressive trade actions aimed at China, Europe, Mexico, Canada, and beyond. The message was clear: economic pressure equals leverage. But now the highest court in the country has drawn a line. At the heart of the ruling was a constitutional question that had been building quietly for years. Could a president unilaterally impose broad, economy-wide tariffs under emergency powers without explicit congressional approval?
We're doing something in a different way. We're doing something in a very powerful way. And we're using things that some people thought we should have used in the first place. But it's more complicated. It's a little more complicated. The process takes a little more time.
The administration argued yes, citing national security provisions and executive authority under trade statutes. Opponents argued that Congress holds the power to regulate commerce and that emergency authorities were stretched far beyond their original intent. The court agreed with the challengers. In a decision that legal analysts are already calling historic, the justices ruled that the scope of the tariffs exceeded statutory authority and violated the constitutional separation of powers. While presidents have some flexibility in trade matters, the court determined that sweeping global tariff regimes, especially those framed as indefinite or punitive, require clearer congressional authorization. This wasn't just a technical correction, it was a rebuke.
To impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122, over and above our normal tariffs already being charged.
The ruling effectively dismantles the legal foundation behind Trump's broad tariff architecture. That means billions of dollars in imposed duties now hang in uncertainty. Importers, manufacturers, and retailers who absorbed or passed along tariff costs may now seek refunds. Ongoing trade disputes built around those tariffs could unravel. And perhaps most significantly, the decision limits how future presidents, Republican or Democrat, can weaponize trade policy without legislative backing. Markets reacted immediately. Futures ticked upward as investors interpreted the ruling as reducing long-term trade volatility. Global partners responded cautiously but optimistically, seeing the decision as a signal that American trade policy may return to more predictable, rule-based frameworks. For American businesses, the implications are enormous. Tariffs function as taxes on imports. Companies often pay them at the border and either absorb the cost or pass it to consumers. Over time, those costs ripple through supply chains, influencing everything from auto prices to home construction materials. With the court striking down the framework, companies now face a transitional period. Will Congress act? Will a new legislative trade structure replace executive authority? Or will the U.S. temporarily revert to pre-tariff conditions in certain sectors? Politically, this is one of the most significant setbacks Trump has faced on economic policy.
And Donald Trump responding to the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to strike down his emergency global tariffs. Trump says that a new 10% global tariff.
His tariff strategy was built on the idea that aggressive trade pressure would revive domestic manufacturing, rebalance trade deficits, and force foreign governments into concessions. Supporters saw it as tough negotiation. Critics saw it as destabilizing and costly. Now, the legal system has intervened. This ruling doesn't automatically end all tariffs. Some remain tied to specific investigations or congressional mandates, but the sweeping global approach, the backbone of the strategy, has been invalidated. And that changes the political landscape heading into future debates about industrial policy, trade protectionism, and economic sovereignty. Congress now faces a decision. Lawmakers can attempt to codify certain tariffs through formal legislation, but that requires bipartisan support, something far from guaranteed in the current climate. Alternatively, Congress could reassert its constitutional role in trade policy more aggressively, narrowing executive flexibility moving forward. Internationally, allies and rivals alike are recalculating. European officials who challenge aspects of the tariff structure at the World Trade Organization may view this as vindication. Canada and Mexico, whose industries were hit during earlier tariff rounds, are likely analyzing how this affects cross-border supply chains. China, long the primary target of trade pressure, will watch closely to see whether a new framework emerges or whether U.S. trade policy becomes less confrontational. The deeper question isn't just about tariffs, it's about presidential power. For decades, Congress has gradually delegated more trade authority to the executive branch, often to allow faster negotiation and enforcement. But as tariffs became broader and more frequent, legal scholars warned that delegation without limits could erode constitutional balance. The Supreme Court's decision appears to mark a corrective moment, reinforcing that economic emergency powers cannot substitute for legislative approval in long-term structural trade policy. Supporters of the ruling argue it restores constitutional order. Critics argue it weakens America's ability to respond swiftly to unfair trade practices. Both perspectives reflect a broader debate over how economic power should be exercised in a globalized world. For Trump personally, this decision undercuts a signature achievement. Tariffs were repeatedly described as tools that made other countries pay. The court's ruling suggests that the way they were structured may not withstand constitutional scrutiny. That doesn't erase the political narrative built around them, but it changes the legal terrain permanently. The immediate next steps will be complex. Federal agencies must review which tariff collections are affected. Legal teams representing importers will likely file claims. Congress may hold hearings, and political campaigns will frame the decision either as a defense of constitutional checks and balances or as judicial interference in economic policy. What's clear is that the balance of power just shifted. The Supreme Court has reminded Washington that even aggressive economic strategies must operate within constitutional boundaries. Trade policy is no longer just about negotiations with foreign capitals. It is now a battleground over executive authority at home. And that makes this more than a trade story. It's a structural moment in American governance.